Welcome to the BOGART Effect, a wealthy wisdom podcast. The following BOGART Effect podcast is intended for general information purposes only. The information discussed is no substitute for personalized investment advice from BOGART or another investment professional. Please see important disclosure information at the end of the presentation. All right, good morning. Welcome to the BOGART Effect. I've got Sydney Rutledge with me today, and we're going to be talking a little bit about multi-generational planning. Thanks, Sydney, for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
You know, this is a topic that I would say is very near and dear to BOGART Wealth. You know, our mission is to help our clients achieve financial peace of mind by preserving and maximizing intergenerational wealth. So, you know, the reality of it is your kids, your parents, they can be some of the largest variables in anyone's financial plan. You know, and this conversation around multi-generational planning is something that kind of permeates in almost every phase of a planning process. You know, even if you think about it, when we start out engaging with a household, more often than not, they're usually mid to late 40s and sometimes, you know, up into their early 60s, right? So let's just say that 15-year period of time. And in a lot of instances, you're kind of in the thick of it, right? You've either got, you know, kids that are now leaving high school, going into college, maybe graduating from college and going out into the workforce. Simultaneously, you might have aging parents that are now all of a sudden having some medical issues. There's wealth transfer conversations. You might be retiring somewhere, and there's just a lot of things going on. And this is that active phase of life that I think it's really, really important to lean in on these multi-generational conversations. So, Sydney, tell us a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. Some of the focuses.
Definitely, yeah. So we're going to hit kind of three main areas. The first is going to be the values and communications piece. This is really about what the money is used for. What is the goal with the portfolio and how you communicate that to the various generations that are part of your plan. The next thing is going to be the structure and the protection. So this comes to all different things like legal, tax, beneficiary architecture. So how everything is structured from a paper perspective, what is actually on paper when it comes to the entire portfolio. And then last is going to be preparation and continuity. So it's how to communicate with those next generations, how to educate them, and then what are the decision-making systems that are in place when it comes to how to make decisions about this portfolio. And those are kind of the three main things that we're going to be talking about today.
And I think even before we dive in, I would tell you, I'm kind of more at this self-actualized place myself where it's like, not every family wants their kids to know, right? Like not every family wants their beneficiary. It might even not be their children. It might be someone else, but wants them to know the level of wealth. And by the way, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think the point that we're trying to instill today with the podcast is more around what does the wealth represent? And once we've established that, then from there, we can start building out the framework, right? And it's all the governance related things, legal documents, stewardship, et cetera. But I do think that it's important to frame this in the lens of when we think about your parents' plan can have an impact on you. And it could be an expense outlay, like where your parents are aging and they're going into long-term care facilities or they need care. They might not have the financial resources to provide it. Is that something that you want to be in a position to be able to cover? So that's one pathway. But at the same time, too, you also could be in the fortunate position where your parents might be leaving you a legacy. You know, and from a financial planning perspective, I never like to include inheritance from a establishment of viability, like does the plan work? We don't include it for that reason, but there are so many instances where mom and dad might not have done the planning work that they needed to do for you as the, let's just say, patriarch in this conversation, that are going to have financial implications on you. And I think, you know, very distinctly, I know you and I are working together on a household where there's inherited IRA and you know, we're in the thick of doing some tax planning work that now the inherited IRA is coming in, and we're having to integrate it into the conversation. It's not a problem. Like I'd always rather have the assets that we have to pay tax on and have to manage, but it does have an impact on the tax work that we're doing. And I know we'll dive into that. And I want to put a thumb in into that because there's advanced planning work that we could even be doing with mom and dad before they leave you money, right? As an example. But on the same token, right, I also think that if you're in the very fortunate position and this is James talk, right? But if you're in the very fortunate position that you're going to be leaving a legacy, and by the way, that legacy doesn't always have to be financial resources, but if you're leaving a legacy, you really do, in my personal opinion, have an obligation to help steward that wealth. And that wealth could be financial, it could be knowledge, it could be intellectual capital, it could be lots and lots of philanthropic, mindset, et cetera. But that's where this is the opportunity when we think about multi-generational planning to start passing on that legacy and those values and what's important to you. And so, and even in order to even start this conversation, we have to assess where we are right now. And I think in a lot of cases, people think, okay, I've got a balance sheet. Here's where all the accounts are. It's so much more than that, right? Like it's absolutely so much more than that. When I think about the family assets, it's all the things that I was also listing a moment ago, right? It's yes, the financial resources are one of the conversations, but it's the value system and alignment. And this is very much where I'm sitting right now personally. I'm thinking about how do I want my kids to be impacted? How do I want them to be stewards? And what do I value as a advisor, as an investor, as a father, as a patriarch myself? And this is where I think that's where we have to establish that baseline, right? And once we can establish that baseline, it becomes so much easier for all of these other conversations to kind of fall into line, right? So talk to me a little bit about the family balance sheet, Sydney.
Sure. It's exactly what you said. It is so much more than just here's a list of all of my accounts and their relative value. It's what they're invested in. Are there any different types of investments that have restrictions on them? Anything like that? Business interests that you have, debts across all different sources. But more than that, it's there are physical documents usually that are in place for most of these families. It's things like wills, power of attorneys, medical directives, trusts, if that's something that's been set up, and then beneficiary designations, of course, are key. So when it comes to the family balance sheet, it's just really important to know what of that information is going to be communicated to what people, because there's sometimes a difference between people that are just being kept on a need to know basis and then people that are actually part of the decision making when it comes to the next generation. So that feeds into a little bit of like the family operating system in general, which is who is the quarterback in this particular situation? Who's going to be informed versus who gets to make decisions? And it all is kind of wrapped up into one.
And obviously now I've got almost 20 years of experience here where I've seen, unfortunately, people passing and this happen, right? And the one thing that I will place so much emphasis on, at least how you're thinking about multi-generational planning, is be intentional on communication. Everything you just said is so spot on. There are going to be people that are beneficiaries, but they don't need to be decision makers, right? And there are similarly, there are decision makers that need to know, right? And so I'll use my grandparents when they passed away, and they were fortunate to have saved some money, and there was a legacy conversation that was happening. At one point, my uncle was the executor. At one point, my dad was the executor, and of course that kind of flip flopped a little bit. The beneficiaries never changed, right? But there's 5 siblings, and there was a tremendous amount of ambiguity about the intention around the asset flow and who got what. And all of a sudden it just creates so much friction and animosity between the siblings in already a very emotional period of time. And to me, when I think about a family operating system, this is the framework of how decisions are being made. And by the way, if you're in the camp of you're not comfortable letting your beneficiaries know what you have, then leave it right there, right? Let's establish the decision-making tree, right? It's a very clear line of thinking of, all right, this is the person who's in charge if something happens, and you can leave it there, right? And that's all the beneficiaries actually need to know. By the way, I think that's very basic level. I think that I think there's more to that. But like, again, I'm framing it in the sense of if you're not comfortable with other people knowing, then leave it there, right? Like, and just let them know that, Mary is the person who's appointed. She's going to be making the decisions and something happens to me. And that's it, right? Now, I think that there should be a next layer conversation with Mary of, all right, Mary, here's what I really want to have happen, right? And who gets what. And that way there's not any ambiguity upon the time of passing. And so start being intentional with that line of thinking, right? That's kind of, to me, like the very basic level of as we establish this. And then from there, we can start adding layers, right? Now, for the households that are, let's just say, more open, and they're more transparent about everything with their kids. I mean, you and I have done a meeting with a 15-year-old kid, right? I can't remember how old. Excuse me. And my point there is like, that's someone who's thinking very, very early on wanting to educate their kids. And they have no issue with the kids knowing how much mom and dad have. I'm not saying one line of thinking is right, nor is it wrong. The one thing I will say just kind of anecdotally, as kids hit their teenage years, they're pretty smart. And now with the internet and power of technology, they can start making some guesses pretty darn quickly. Now, they might not know exactly how much, but like you could Zillow and see how much the house is worth, right? Like you could see what the property taxes were, right? Like you can start to extrapolate, the beneficiaries can start to extrapolate and make some assumptions, which the one thing I'll say about assumptions is that they can be very dangerous. But the point is like the kids will start making some assumptions around what mom and dad have, right? And so I'm kind of, as I've, again, using my years of experience, leaning more in the camp of starting to introduce it in gradual manner earlier on in life. But I fully appreciate that there are lots of our clients that are not comfortable with that. Fine. But we have to find that medium somewhere in there, right? But when we start thinking about when we are bringing them in, I still love coming back to that initial framework of like, this is our values. This is what the wealth represents. This is what we want to have happen, right? And that's the message that we're starting to convey to the beneficiaries. Like my kids are too young right now for me to have this conversation with them. Now I am obviously raising them with the alignment of those values, but like, I'm not going to flat out say to them, you're going to inherit money and you're never going to work again. Like obviously that's not a value of mine, nor would that ever be something that I would set them up for. If anything, it's the exact opposite of that. Like, I don't want you to inherit any money because I don't want you to be not incentivized to work, right? Like,
well, and you're right. They are young, but it's never too early to start laying the foundational brickwork, if you will, for that financial literacy piece. Because Bingo. Kids as young as, 5, 6, 7 years old, they can start getting allowances. And I've heard of parents doing very creative things like, yeah, you get a $5 allowance, but $2 of it goes to taxes and $1 goes to savings and you're left with $2, And so
my kids pay rent.
There you go. Exactly.
Yeah, no,
exactly.
I hit them with
pay for groceries.
Yeah. Yeah, I hit them just to, again, and I actually do find value in handing them the $10 bill, and then I have a stack of ones so that they can, color down their bills, and then they can hand me back the dollars. Again, that's tangential in the grand scheme, but we're trying to teach them budgeting, and we're trying to teach them, how it structures. And they each have their own account now, right? So they can see what the balance is of their savings account, in addition to the piggy banks that they have. But the point is like, the messaging of what the values are associated with it, I think is extremely important. And so we do start to see, and this is becoming more and more popular, is these family meetings where we do have all of the at least the decision maker, the let's just call it G2 decision maker that comes into the room so that they are now aligned. Part of our role as an advisor is we do serve, obviously in a fiduciary capacity, but we do serve as kind of the quarterback that's helping pull all these pieces together, especially when we talk about this wealth transfer conversation. And there's the proactive element of all the planning work that we're going to be doing while you're alive and well, and we hope you have a nice long time frame that you're alive and well, because frankly we can do a lot of optimization work while you're alive. But at the time of passing, there's a lot of logistical things that have to happen. I mean, we have another client who unfortunately mom and brother passed away within a very short period. I think it was 2 weeks apart, and the brother was supposed to be the trustee of the mom's estate. And so now all of a sudden we have this waterfall effect where and it was extremely disorganized, right? Because mom's stuff was at, I think it was like 15 different custodians, right? And then the brother's stuff was at like 8 different custodians. Brother was beneficiary from mom, like, and so we had all of these logistical things that were happening. And then the remaining siblings were left with, none of this was communicated with us. Like, yeah, we were finding things, like different statements that we're finding more money in different places. Like, that's the disorganization that I think when we talk about multi-generational planning, like, let's make sure that we're preventing that. All right. I want to get us a little bit back on track here, but let's talk a little bit about the governance and structure. So, a lot of people are they ask about wills, they ask about trusts. Talk a little bit about what the difference is there.
Absolutely. So the will is going to be the document that kind of lays the framework, and it's going to capture anything that doesn't have a beneficiary designation. One thing that's important to remember is that beneficiary designations on accounts will always supersede what's in the will.
Bingo. Emphasize. Let's put a big pin in that one.
Yeah, exactly.
So even if because to translate that, even if you go in and meet with an attorney and you get a whole new set of documents, if you don't change the beneficiary designations per the documents, the old ones still are in force.
That's correct. I actually had a quick story. I had a client who had her husband as beneficiary, and then they got divorced. And she forgot to change it. Luckily, amicable relationship. She changed it, and it was fine. But those kinds of things can happen if you just get caught up in your career and in your life. You got to make sure that the beneficiary designations are actually aligned with, God forbid, something happening to you, where you'd want those assets to pass. And then a will is kind of the language that outlines where you want everything to go. The will can be used for things that are non-beneficiary eligible, things like personal items, jewelry, cars, even cars. You can technically have a deed to where those pass to. That's what a will is. A trust is a more specific estate document. It has to be drafted. Well, I mean, they both have to be drafted by attorneys, but the trust is more about control. I think a lot of people have a misconception about trusts, and they think that they are tax efficient vehicles. And that's not necessarily the case. The whole kind of bottom line with a trust is you're trying to enact control from beyond the grave. That is the point of a trust document. There's a lot of other things that it does, protection and things like that.
Yeah,
but
avoidance of probate, alignment. Control. Yeah, I mean, creditor protection, beneficiary protection. Yeah. But I will put in, we have entire podcasts talking just about these documents in more detail. You're absolutely right. I just think, and I want to also emphasize the point that you made, that a lot of people I think are misinterpret the necessity around them, right? Like why you need a will versus why you need a trust. If you have any questions on it, first off, always seek financial advice around it. But I will tell you, when it comes to my general guidance, if you're even thinking about a legacy conversation, in almost every instance, trusts make a lot of sense. And a lot of it comes back to avoidance of probate, protection against creditors, protection against divorce, and then just alignment of interest. As you're pointing out, control from the grave. My professor in college used to say, if you don't trust him, trust him. And the thing is like the evolution of life. Like we talk about the life cycle. If you've got kids that haven't demonstrated financial responsibility, I would tell you point blank, you have to do it. For their own good, right? But similarly, I would also say this is where this multi-generational conversation is so important. Like, if we believe there will be a legacy conversation or wealth transfer, I'm of the opinion that we need to be, in a proactive manner, educating them as early as we possibly can. And what does that education look like? It's intentional conversations. It's introducing them to advisors like us. It's helping them establish some early on investment accounts. Might be a small, relatively nominal amount of money, but allowing them to start getting that investment hygiene in place so they can start seeing these things. And then the rest of this governance stuff kind of like just naturally fits in. Let's get into the investments a little bit, right? So talk to me here about, some of the structuring and whatnot on the investment side.
No, definitely. And there's a lot of different considerations when it comes to choosing investments for your portfolio. Of course, as always, consult a financial professional to make sure that you're aligning your own risk tolerance and time horizon with your investments. That's kind of bottom line here. But structuring the portfolio in a sustainable way that achieves all of your goals. If the goal is long-term growth versus, short-term, then we need to make sure the investments are aligned with that. And then also, if you're philanthropic, there are certain investment vehicles that can be used to give money away to friends, family, charitable organizations as well, and making sure that that aligns with your values also. And then it also goes into what you said earlier about helping your children without enabling them. There's a way to do that from an investment perspective that doesn't encourage them to maybe be irresponsible with money, but can kind of put some guardrails on it as well.
And so like what I love, especially when we've kind of moved to this conversation, we've established viability, right? Like we know that you are not going to run out of money with a very high degree of confidence, right? Once we've done that, then it becomes a very natural progression on the conversation of we should start having a discussion around some lifetime giving to your children. And so we now are in a place where we can do $19,000 per year, per husband, per wife, so $38,000 total gift without even having to file a gift tax return. There's no documents, no paperwork that's necessary around it. And so from my lens, that's kind of like the outer boundary of an annual gift that we're talking about right now, just to start this mechanism of helping them understand what investments are. Now, by the way, I'm not saying give your kids $38,000 a year. We should absolutely be integrating a giving strategy within a portfolio design, but that's kind of the framework of what we can do. And just quick tangent, because I know we're going to talk a little bit about tax side, but if your kids have earned income, we should be setting up Roth IRAs as soon as possible. All three of my children have a job. They work. They're young, but they work, and they all have W-2 income. They all have a Roth IRA established now. I think it's really, really, really important, even if it's, lifeguarding, babysitting, especially if they have a W-2 or a 1099, this is easy. Like establish the Roth for them and get money in a place that's growing tax-free as early as possible. Because one of the messages that we're going to be trying to illustrate for them is the value of time value money. And the earlier you can get money invested, the faster it's going to grow and compound and become bigger and bigger and bigger. And the more we can continue to save, the bigger that number continues to be. So when I think about this whole multi-generational conversation and stewardship of wealth and setting things up appropriately, some of it is a little bit of an annual gift. It might just be a one-time thing to establish a baseline so they can have an account in their name, see it. By the way, you can kind of see some of the hygiene that they have, right? Like, and I won't pick on the particular individual I'm thinking of, but he had money that went into a Roth that was a gift every single year. He would suck it right out, right? Like, okay, well that very clearly shows the type of thinking that individual has, right? Like, and candidly, that as a patriarch, if my kids were doing that, I would immediately stop putting more money in. Like, it's a very simple conversation, right? Like, and so, but that's why we're doing part of this, right? And by the way, if I saw that behavior and this was going to be a longer term beneficiary, I would change the language in the trust documents to also put more guidance for that particular individual.
That's right. That's the beauty of trust, is that they're very customizable.
But that's exactly right. So not to tangent too far on the trust thing, right? But like you could have three beneficiaries that have three different distribution provisions, like how each of them have access to money. And I think it's really important from a patriarch perspective, if you're the one establishing that, I think it's really important to also vocalize why you did that, right? Because that's a great example of, let's just say you have three kids that have different access to monies. And from my lens, it still comes back to this value conversation, but let's just say one is really, really bad with money and one is really, really good with money. You could do the same language for all three, but I also don't necessarily think it's always fair to penalize the person who's really good with money with having the exact same language with the person who's not very good with money. Again, that's where this is all very bespoke to each and every one of us. But I think if you do decide to go the pathway with different language for each of them, then you should articulate that. I've got another one that I'm working on where the one of the children has a substance abuse issue. And so because of that, mom and dad were very concerned with their ability to have access to money and what that could potentially do to their own health and well-being. So we have a lot more guardrails there, right? As an example, and that's a very easily definable one, right? Like, and we're doing it as a protection mechanism. But again, the beautiful part about trust is we can fully customize all of the language around it. And I think it's really important to directly tie it back into the investment conversation, right? And so when I think about someone who's in the position, and we have a lot of these conversations around asset allocation, percentage of equities to fixed income, to alternatives, and how that portfolio is diversified. But when we're in a position where we've established baseline level of needs, it's not uncommon that we're having the conversation around this portion of the portfolio is being invested at your kid's risk profile, not yours. And
That's right.
Again, it's an alignment conversation that we want to make sure that everybody is on the same page. But, especially if we're doing a lot of Roth conversions and that Roth money is essentially going to the kids, and hopefully you live for another 25, 30 years. Well, I'm hoping that we can get tax-free growth that's all going to be transferred over to the kids, right? But there is also the ancillary benefit that even if it doesn't go to the kids and you need that money, you've still had hopefully 10 plus, 30 plus years of growth that's been completely tax-free. And so I think the point that I'm making is making sure that the monies are invested in a manner that aligns with what the goals and objectives are for the money, if that makes sense.
That's right. One other thing that I'd like to kind of talk about or make sure we touch on at least is it can go the other way as well, especially when it comes to supporting maybe the generation right above you, not necessarily the one below you, but when it comes to your parents. And we hit on earlier how it could go either way. You could have parents that there's an expense outlay for their care, or you could also be on the other end of it where they've done a good job saving and investing, and you may be potentially inheriting some assets. Talk a little bit about when it comes to supporting parents, maybe something that comes out of the blue, something that's unexpected. Maybe you weren't planning on having that cash outlay. How can you change your investments to maybe fulfill that goal as well?
The one comment I want to make to that real quickly is the only thing that's certain is change, right? Like change is inevitable. And there's always going to be something that comes up that we weren't anticipating. And the whole purpose of planning is to establish, a guiding point on directional manner, right? And so when I think about like course corrections that happen inevitably, like I can't tell you the number of times mom or dad, something's happened with them and it's induced retirements, right? Like that's a big life change, right? Where I want to retire to be available to spend more time with my parents. Okay, well now all of a sudden we've got multiple years less of work and income, and now we have a higher expense profile. We have the example where mom or dad do not have the resources to cover their care. It's extremely important to me for me to cover that. When I think about the expense side actually to me is actually the easiest of all of them. And I don't mean that cavalierly, right? Like economically, money is money, and that does have an impact. But when we think about sourcing of cash flow, it's no different than if someone decides that they want to buy something lavish, right? Another home, boat, whatever. We just need to adjust the allocations respectively. I'm a big disciple of what I call the bucket approach, right? I want short-term, intermediate, and long-term monies. And I know I just spent a minute ago talking about the long-term monies, which is where we take our risk. But in the case of, let's just say mom or dad has something that happens and all of a sudden we need to have more access to capital, that's where it's a very intentional conversation around increasing that short-term bucket, right? Where it's essentially saying, I'm going to pull monies from that intermediate or longer-term bucket and make it available so that it's not moving around with the market as much, because I need certainty established with where we're going to have access to that capital. And I think that's very natural. It doesn't bother me in any way, shape, or form. And oh, by the way, I've also seen instances where this was a concern and it may or may not actually manifest. And so, it gave us peace of mind by elevating the cash position, right? Or maybe it wasn't cash, maybe it was short-term fixed income vehicles, whatever. But where we increased that short-term bucket for whatever that period of time is, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. And we had the peace of mind that it was there. If the issue arose, fine. Yes, there was some opportunity cost on what that money could have otherwise been invested in, but the peace of mind outweighed the economic implications associated with the opportunity cost. So, I think to your point, Sydney, it all comes back to the plan and staying entrenched in the plan. When those types of evolving things happen, whether it's your kids, your parents, bring it back to the plan, and then everything else kind of sequences within that, right? Was there something else that you were thinking that you wanted me to hit on with that? Or
no, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. When I think I go back to the household that you and I work on together, where there was kind of an influx from an inheritance, and how that really changed the planning. We did take it back to the plan immediately as soon as we knew about that, which is a perfect segue into kind of the next section that I think we should talk about, which is the tax impact on yourself and then also on the next generation. The goal here is to minimize taxes while also ensuring a smooth transfer to the next generation. So let's get into the tax piece.
And I think that it's really important to understand, I don't like to let the tax tail wag the dog, if you will, right? Like we're not trying to make decisions simply for tax, but there is a lot of optimization work that can happen. To frame it, I think it's important to just really quickly outline the three different high-level account types. Like you have non-qualified accounts, which would be brokerage accounts, checking accounts. These are accounts that have capital gains implications. You pay taxes on dividend income, you pay taxes on interest. So you're paying tax along the way. And then when you buy something or sell something, you could have a capital gain component associated with it. The second buckets of money is what we call qualified accounts. There's a lot of the retirement accounts, it's IRAs, it's 401ks. Most of those are pre-tax monies. So you didn't pay tax on the way in. They're growing completely tax deferred. And when you take the money out, you pay ordinary income. Those also have those dreaded required minimum distributions, which is when you turn age either 73 or 75, you're required to start taking money out of those. Right. So we have to do a lot of advanced planning on required minimum distributions. And then the third bucket of money is Roths, which is where we put money in on an after-tax basis. And as long as you're over the age of 59 and a half and those monies have been in for 5 years, the growth is all completely tax-free as well. No required minimum distributions there. The challenge that we run into in a lot of these tax conversations is, again, we're talking about the transfer of wealth now, right? And this will apply to parents to you or you to your beneficiaries. You know, when we talk about those non-qualified accounts, all of those get what are called step up in basis. So when someone dies with a brokerage account, let's just say the cost basis is $100 and it's now worth $500. When you die, that steps up to the date of death valuation, which is the $500. So we escape a good amount of tax implication there when someone passes away. And I'm going to put a little caveat that NUA stock, if you have NUA stock, doesn't qualify for that, but that's a whole presentation on that. But when we talk about the pre-tax, the 401ks and the IRAs, the beneficiary rules could get very tricky here. And so if it's husband to wife, let's ignore that for now because it's essentially the same thing. But when an IRA or a 401k transfers from, let's just say mom or dad to the kids, well, now you have this special rule. It's called the 10-year rule. You have to take all of the monies out of that account within 10 years. And that can create a tax component that we weren't necessarily planning for. By the way, that same rule actually applies to Roths. That 10-year rule also applies to Roths as well. So when we're talking about this planning work, and I'm going to come back to that household that we were talking about there, earlier that you and I both work on, there was an inherited IRA that came in. And, the couple had already done all of the planning work without any of the inheritance as an assumption. And then next thing you know, we have an inherited IRA that comes in that is a number that has to be then managed because, again, coming back to this 10-year rule, where all of a sudden we've got 10 years, we've got to take all that money out of that inherited IRA account. Again, all ordinary income. So now we're in a situation where we don't want that ordinary income because we're trying to do the tax optimization work for their assets. And again, it's a good problem. I'd always rather have the assets than not have the assets. But now we're in a position where we have to sequence that inheritance or that wealth transfer in. And it's not uncommon, by the way, that when most of our client base is entering into retirement age, that's when those wealth transfers start to happen. And then they're completely disincentivized to work because it's like, oh my gosh, I don't want to have the extra, because let's just put numbers to it. Let's say you inherit a $3 million IRA account. Well, 10 years, if you just take it equally, that's $300,000 a year. And if you don't do it, you're just making the problem bigger later, right? So, and it becomes very tax inefficient. So the reason that I'm even going down this road is because this is where, from my lens, tax optimization on especially a wealth transfer conversation is really probably, and I think a good advisor is anticipating what this problem is going to be. But I think this is really the most important problem that most advisors can help with in a very, very accretive way. And this is why I think it's so important when we look at mom and dad. And if mom and dad all of a sudden are going to be, and this is why the transparency on the assets and the asset flow is so important. But if mom and dad have IRA accounts and they're all of a sudden in a lower tax bracket than where you are, there's actually a conversation that might make sense for mom and dad to do some Roth conversions, even if they have required minimum distributions, because that then means that those monies are moved from that pre-tax environment and now tax-free. So you're going to inherit it tax-free, which is, by the way, the same conversation we're having for our clients that have these large IRA accounts, right? We're not only trying to manage required minimum distributions for them, but we're also making the assumption that they're in the fortunate position that they're going to leave money to the next generation as well. And then that becomes a very natural conversation of, yeah, we want your kids to inherit this money completely tax-free as well. They'll get another 10 years of completely tax-free growth after they inherit it, and then they can take it all tax-free out, right? So if there's any takeaway on the podcast today, it's that tax optimization on a multi-generational basis is probably where I believe some of the biggest value creation is for a financial advisor. And if the advisor is not doing that work, then I think that you're leaving a lot of money on the table, and I think that there's a serious conversation around value creation associated with them. Last thing I want to hit here on the tax side is around this charitable piece, right? Like if you're a philanthropic, the charities don't pay taxes, and I think that that's a great place to be leaving IRAs. And again, this is part of this multi-generational planning conversation. But if you're not, if you're charitably inclined, I think that charities should be beneficiaries of retirement accounts. Right. And after that, then we have to start sequencing conversations. Because again, anything that's got big unrealized gains, it's going to get step up in basis. Leave that to your loved ones. Right. And the Roths, leave that to the loved ones. The IRAs, like they've got this burden of the 10-year rule. So maybe it's a piece of it, right? Or it's all of it, whatever your inclinations are. But make sure we're sequencing a philanthropic need or desire within an overall plan as well.
No, fully agree. The only other thing that I'll add to the charitable piece is the use of a donor advised fund. This is more done while you're alive, specifically with brokerage assets. Lots of times, the most advantageous things to put into a donor advised fund are those really highly appreciated holdings that you have. Because again, if you were to say, hey, I want to give, make up a number, $25,000 to a charity. If you were then to sell that investment that's in that brokerage account, you'd have to pay capital gains taxes on when you sell that investment. If you instead just donate the appreciated security to the donor advised fund, you pass along that tax burden to an entity that does not pay taxes.
Bingo.
So using a donor advised fund can be done kind of while you're alive. And then the alternative is making the charitable organization a beneficiary on your IRA, exactly as you said, because they do not pay taxes. So even though the 10-year rule may still apply, you get to kind of pass that on to them.
You know, and one other thing I'll add is while you're alive too, just because you brought up the donor advised fund, is we can also do qualified charitable distributions from IRA accounts to help with some of this tax management work as well. It's a tax-free disbursement from an IRA account starting at the age of 70 and a half. You cannot do it prior to that. But once you've attained that age, you can actually also use that to offset some of the required minimum distributions as well. So I think the message here is it's complicated. This is where I believe a financial advisor can add a tremendous amount of value. Integration of the tax with the planning, with the estate planning, in addition to the investment overlay, I think is really at the epicenter of this conversation. Sydney, I know we covered a lot today, and I think hopefully it was of value to the audience. But really, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
The previous presentation by Bogart Wealth was intended for general information purposes only. No portion of the presentation serves as the receipt of or as a substitute for personalized investment advice from Bogart Wealth or any other investment professional of your choosing. Different types of investments involve varying degrees of risk, and it should not be assumed that future performance of any specific investment or investment strategy or any other non-investment related or planning services, discussion, or content will be profitable, be suitable for your portfolio or individual situation, or prove successful. Neither Bogart Wealth's investment advisor registration status nor any amount of prior experience or success should be construed that a certain level of results or satisfaction will be achieved if Bogart Wealth is engaged or continues to be engaged to provide investment advisory services. Bogart Wealth is neither a law firm nor accounting firm, and no portion of its services shall be construed as legal or accounting advice. No portion of the podcast content should be construed by a client or prospective client as a guarantee that he or she will experience a certain level of results if Bogart Wealth is engaged or continues to be engaged to provide investment advisory services. Copies of Bogart Wealth's current written disclosure brochure and Form CRS discussing our advisory services and fees are available upon request or at www.bogartwealth.com.